Okay, welcome to all of you. Thank you for participating in this webinar addressing offshore macroalgae production. This webinar was fully booked within 5 days, and we decided to increase the total number of attendees to get all of you on board. And we have now registrations for 180 people, so very welcome to all of you. We are today a very broad represented audience with participants and panelists and presenters for most of the Atlantic area, from Chile, South Africa, the US, Europe. This event is part of the EU-funded AquaVitae project that initiated in 2019 and will run until 2023. The purpose of the project is to introduce new low-traffic species, products, and processes in marine aquaculture value chains across the Atlantic Ocean. And our case study is one of the 9 case studies in the project and part of the value chain called seaweed. If you would like to know more about the project AquaVitae in general, then you can go to the link which is shown on the slide. My name is Urt Grandorf-Bach. I am the research manager of Ocean Rainforest and the offshore seaweed cultivation case study leader in AquaVitae. I will be the moderator of the day and keep track of time as well as the panel discussions. Together with me behind another screen, I have the CEO of Ocean Rainforest, Olavur Gregersen, and production manager Flora Marsman, who will help me with the techniques as well as keeping an eye on the questions that you can write to the presenters or panelists. Our main expertise is to cultivate seaweed, and this is our first webinar, so we hope that you will bear with us if we have technical problems along the way. We will today run through 3 sessions. They will be divided by a short break of 5 minutes. The first session is about site selection for macroalgae cultivation. The second is about logistics, and the third session aims macroalgae in animal feed. We have the luxury of top motivated speakers and panelists who are specialized in their field. And we will not take questions during the presentations, but will encourage you to add your questions in the question and answer tool, which you find in Zoom. I will inform you that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available after the end of the webinar on the homepage of AquaVitae. To keep you focused, we will ask you questions after each session, and these questions will be used in the project work and contribute to the work of the second loop of this AquaVitae project, which I will come back to later. And now we will test it. So the first poll is now ready for you. So let's try to answer. How would you describe yourself in relation to this workshop? Please help us and fill it out. There's 2 questions. The second is, in which of the following geographical regions are you operating? There are a technical problem submitting answers. I hope it does not count for all of you. Okay, thank you for the answers. These poll along the way, they will be used afterwards, but thank you so much for contributing to this. We will now continue to the first session, site selection for macroalgae cultivation. Our first presenter is Johannes Christmusson, a researcher at Fiskaaling in the Faroe Islands, where he has worked since 2018. Johannes holds a master from Rhodes University in wireless communication systems and is currently pursuing a PhD degree at the University of the Faroe Islands. Fiskaaling is partner of this AquaVitae project, so please, Johannes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Short. Hello, everyone. I will present the work that me and Gunnar did in the site selection of AquaVitae to do. Our contribution is to develop a method for site selection in open ocean environments. Thank you for your introduction, of course. I think I have a slide next here which has a picture of me. Yeah, as Ward said, background in electronical engineering and signal processing, and I'm a PhD student now. But before starting on my PhD, I did this work on at AquaVitae for AquaVitae. I will just tell you a little bit about the Faroe Islands. The Faroe Islands is an archipelago in the middle of North Atlantic. I have a picture on the next slide. Or he could change. The Faroe Islands are situated between Norway and Iceland, a bit north of the UK. I just thought, just add this in because there are so many people from different places around the world. The weather in the Faroe Islands varies wildly. If we have the next picture, we have on the next slide, please. We can see the weather. It looks almost like this today. It's loads of snow and very still. But unfortunately, sometimes it looks a little bit more like the other picture on the left with the large waves and strong winds. Sometimes the winds can even reach speeds over 50 meters per second. And because of these winds, of course, these can very quickly obstruct farming operations and so on. So if you can go to the next slide. To find suitable locations for macroalgae production, especially upscale ones, we first need to define the requirements for each of for a site. There are some operational conditions that we need to consider. For example, the depth. If it's too shallow, you cannot produce very much. If it's too deep, it will complicate a lot of stuff. Also, it would be best if the structure where the production is happening doesn't break. This sets a requirement for currents and waves. And it's also important that the site provides growing conditions, proper growing conditions. This includes nutrient availability, proper temperatures, and salinity. Now, if you can go to the next slide, I'll be a bit naughty here. I've made some very big assumptions. First of all, the salinity of the Faroe Island is very high because we're in the middle of the ocean, and we have a very high water exchange with inside the fjords. And the water column is weakly stratified, so this doesn't require much to mix up the water. And as long as there's some current, we will assume that salinity is okay. And for nutrient availability, there's not too much information available, especially considering spatial distribution. But for the information that we have, it seems like there's plenty of nutrients. And what we're going to do is just assume that if there is some currents, then we'll have some mixing of the water, and therefore the salinity and the nutrients should be okay. If we go to the next slide, I have a picture of the water surface temperature. I know the data is 100 years old, but still applies. The temperature varies a few degrees, but it's always within the growing conditions. And if you go further down the water column, the variation is smaller, but it's still within suitable growing conditions. Therefore, I will not really consider too much these growing conditions, but instead just focus on these operational conditions to forward this. Yeah. The currents, it was we've extracted this from a simulation that Knut Simonsen has made. This is a ROM simulation where he provides us with a grid of data where all the constituents of the current speeds are. And what I then did was that I calculated the velocity for each point for a year in 15-minute increments. And on the right, you can see an example of this where I just took one point out. The velocity is on the y-axis, and we can see that it goes up and down 4 times a day. And then we have first a neap tide, and then the maximum current sort of stops there, and then we have the spring tide later, and it goes even higher. So I did this for a whole year, and then for each point, I extracted the maximum current. If we go to the next slide, there's a map. We have where we can, can you put the next slide on? Thank you. So this is sort of the result of this. For each point, there is the maximum expected current velocity. This shows, this only considers gravitational forcing, not really wind-driven currents or wave-driven currents or anything. But this is sort of the basis for where the currents are suitable for macroalgae cultivation. And I also did a similar thing for waves on the next slide, where I have built on the work of Bar Niklasen. Bar had on the Faroe Islands, there have been wave measurements for almost 50 years now. This report is a couple of years old, so this was based on 44 years of statistics, where a swan simulation has been done in trying to estimate what is the largest wave that's possible at each point in the space. And this is where our operational conditions sort of come in again, where we say that as long as the wave height is less than 6 meters, significant wave height, we assume that the site is okay. So if you go to the next one again, we also have a bottom depth to consider. We sort of run into an issue here that there's not very much data, and it's not really from one sources. So what I did was I compiled a seabed triangulation system. I just made a map based on the data you can see on the right. Each line is data. There are some limitations or some holes, but mostly the areas that we sort of would imagine could be suitable, they are covered. So we said that as long as the depth is between 50 and 150 meters, then at least that part of the perimeter is okay. And then if we go to the next slide, I sort of made a grid to cover the whole search area. And for each point on the grid, I just checked on my current simulation if the highest velocity is between 0.1 meters per second, that's to ensure nutrient and salinity availability, but it's lower than 0.5, that's to ensure that the structure doesn't break. If the point is, if the current is okay at this point, and if the wave height is less than 6 meters, and the depth is between 50 and 150 meters, then this point is considered suitable. This sort of creates a map, and where potential sites are shown with dots. There are some false swap positives. These are caused by, there are some problems with combining the data from different sources, but mostly where you can see a cluster of points in the same position, then this site sort of fulfills all the requirements of all the parameters that were before. There are, of course, other parameters to consider, like, for example, shipping lanes, distance to fish farming sites, and so on. But this method sort of gives an overview of potential sites. That's all I have to tell you. Thanks for your attention. You're welcome to send questions with a Q&A or by email to me, Gunvor. Our contact information is on the lower right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johannes. If this has been a physical meeting, you will have a big applause now. But instead, we will go to the next presenter, who is Drew Risnick. She is a marine scientist who specialized in aquaculture and the integration of socioeconomic data in sustainable development. Drew's work and research have involved various studies exploring the geography, biology, ecology, and social aspects of the sustainable development of aquaculture, both onshore and offshore. Drew recently completed her master in GIS at the University of Edinburgh and now works at Columbia University's International Research Institute for Climate and Society. Please, Drew, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I can't tell if my camera is working, but
it is. We can see you.
All right, perfect. All right. Let me get everything ready. All right, so my research in this presentation is based off of my master's dissertation. It's titled Assessing the Potential for Commercial Scale Aquaculture of Edible Brown Algae Alaria esculenta in the Gulf of Maine in the Northwest Atlantic. The goal of this research was to demonstrate the necessity of integrating environmental and socioeconomic data in order to predict suitable sites for offshore aquaculture. Further, the goal was also to shed light on the advantages and some of the current limitations in the progression and use of these types of analyses in sustainable development of aquaculture. Next slide, please. So my research was split into the 4 stages that you can see here on the screen. I'm going to briefly outline these 4 stages in the presentation, and then I'm going to give a very brief summary of some of the results given the short time of this presentation. And if you're interested in more in-depth understanding of any of the methodology, please send me a question. Next slide. All right, so the first stage involved exploration of all available data in the region in order to find data which would best suit the study in terms of the spatiotemporal range, the resolution, and also which variables are best suited for this type of analysis. An important consideration for this type of study was deciding which of the data would be included in each stage of the analysis. For example, due to the cultivation rig being offshore and the kelp being grown on an artificial substrate suspended at a fixed depth, light attenuation as well as depth were excluded from the species distribution model. However, they would be included in the macrospatial analysis for the cultivation rig. Here you can see final environmental variables that were used and how they were partitioned according to specific parameters. Next slide. So socioeconomic data in this study were assessed separately from environmental data, and this table on the screen shows which of the data were used in this study's preliminary socioeconomic analysis. A full socioeconomic analysis was not feasible in the scope of my study, and rather this preliminary data set was used to suggest further exploration for regions of interest and sites which were deemed suitable. Next slide. The second stage of the study was a construction of a species distribution model in which statistical modeling was used to predict a presence-absence map of Alaria. The final result, as you can see on the screen, was a species distribution model threshold map where any value above 0.538 was deemed suitable for the species and was thus highlighted on the maps in purple. Next slide. While the species distribution model was focused primarily on suitability for the algae, this macrospatial analysis was focused on suitability for the rig itself. The methodology was mirrored from that of the previous case study you just heard about, done by Johannes. So the methodology was quite similar. This analysis highlighted any regions which met all 3 rig requirements, and these optimal regions, which you can see highlighted in yellow, they were used as regions of interest throughout the analysis. Next slide. So once the environmental data was analyzed, I was able to integrate some socioeconomic data as well for added context. Some data, such as the map you can see on the left, were used for context, but were not able to be downloaded, and thus were not projected onto any of the maps I created. Other data I was able to analyze through creating bar graphs, as you can see on the right. Next slide. There we go. So ultimately, the results, there were 5 main regions of interest, which you can see are boxed. And within those, there's a total of 8 distinct locations, all within the United States. So closer looks at each region would show polygons, which represent optimal rig locations. And I was then able to overlay them on the species distribution model threshold and add in additional contextual layers, such as aquaculture sites, shipping lanes, and marine sanctuaries. Next slide. So I'll show you just a couple examples of the results given the time frame for this presentation. For an example, this is the region 1. I've split it into 2 maps because there's a lot of layers, so it got a little busy. Just looking at the species distribution model, which you can see in purple, you can see inconsistencies throughout the bay in terms of the actual suitability for the kelp, represented kind of as those gaps in the map itself. Next slide. And then now we can also look at a visualization of some of the socioeconomic factors. Not shown on this map, the NIOD fisheries density and vessel density maps. Those showed that there were high densities in both fisheries and vessels in the area, likely due to proximity to Boston and Cape Cod, which are high tourist destinations. And the GDP breakdown also suggests that this area has very established industry. So this region was found to be the least suitable overall because of the amount of pre-existing industry and the inconsistencies in suitability for Alaria. Next slide. Yes. So a second example of a more suitable region, this is location 4 within region 2. Notably, the part highlighted in yellow is deemed most suitable of this location in general. Within state lines, which is represented as this black line that you can see, there is little boating and fisheries disruptions within that region. However, outside of that region, in the area that's highlighted in orange, there was more intersection of some industries. You can also see that the suitability map does suggest that the entire location is within suitable habitat for Alaria. Next slide. So this is a zoomed in map of the area. You can see clearly the proximity to several offshore mussel farms, which are the green polygons. This does imply that this area is suitable for such industry expansion. And majority of the traffic generated from the industry in this region also would not interfere with the farm from the coastline, according to maps, which were not visualized here. And overall, you can notice a difference in the 2 regions used as examples, both in terms of environmental and socioeconomic suitability. Next slide. So the main conclusion drawn from the research is that there are potential sites for expansion of ocean rainforests in the Gulf of Maine. And the confidence for the research overall was quite high. This species distribution model did have the most room for uncertainty and error, but statistical analyses, which I don't have time to go into here, but I will happily answer questions. They do suggest that the model is able to predict suitability quite well. And next slide. So overall, the analysis worked quite well, but I did identify various possible next steps and ways to expand on projects like mine in the future in order to optimize their use. Some of the notable next steps are using forecast models such as the FECOM model used in this study to explore suitability through different spatio-temporal scales and into the future at varying depths below sea level in order to optimize growth outcomes in a more dynamic way. As well, a more in-depth socioeconomic analysis is definitely recommended for sites that are being more seriously considered. And the utility of such modeling and analysis overall. However, it is shown very clearly through the case study that I just presented. There's much room for expansion and creation of powerful tools that can help inform decision-making, which will result in long-term and sustainable deployment and development of farms, both for the environment and for stakeholders and farmers. So that is my presentation. You can go to the last slide.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, there's one more slide, I think, just with my information.
Yeah.
Any questions? And if you would like to know about the work that I'm doing now, I also added a link to the website as well.
Thank you so much. Very exciting to hear about it. Our next speaker is James Morris. He is a marine ecologist working with NOAA for almost 20 years. James Morris started up as a commercial fisherman 30 years ago in the eastern North Carolina. James and his family have along the way also worked on building the company AquaCulturists, where they have oysters and hard calm aquaculture operation. Please, James, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I want to share my screen.
Yeah. And we see your screen now. Very nice.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Oliver and Eliza, for the invitation to speak at this meeting. I've very much enjoyed it so far. I'd like to share with you some of the new spatial and engineering and intelligence applications for pioneering offshore industries that we are developing within NOAA and in the National Ocean Service. I lead a program in the National Ocean Service, which is part of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a federal agency, of course, in the US, that works to identify locations and opportunities for offshore industries such as marine aquaculture. We're located within our Department of Commerce, and certainly marine aquaculture, all types, finfish, shellfish, and algae are important commercial opportunities that are largely underdeveloped in the United States. And so our program works to develop coastal planning and coastal management tools across the entire U.S. economic exclusive zone, including and also within state waters as well. We have a spatial science team that specializes in data development and aquaculture spatial planning, at multiple scales. So we work at national scales as well as at local and regional scales as well. We provide support to ports and harbors for spatial planning, for opportunity analysis for aquaculture, as well as conducting large-scale planning efforts such as development of planning areas for aquaculture development along the U.S. coastlines. Recently, last year, a presidential executive order was issued to develop 10 aquaculture opportunity areas within the next 7 years. And our program is responsible for conducting the marine spatial planning for those opportunity areas. And we are currently conducting spatial planning and publishing opportunity atlases for those areas within the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California ocean spaces. Those spatial plans and environmental review information will be included in an environmental impact statement that will accompany those planning areas to advise on industry development. We've completed over 50 spatial analyses in the last 5 years for aquaculture development in the U.S. And some of these were affiliated with a large program that was developed within our Department of Energy called the Department of Energy Mariner Program that works to develop technology and identify opportunity for macroalgae cultivation in U.S. waters. I'd like to share with you some innovative tools that we've been working on over the last couple of years. We've worked to really bring big data and understanding of ocean intelligence to the forefront, to basically to the American public. We've worked to do data mining and development specifically for marine aquaculture and other pioneering ocean industries that they can help make decisions early in the planning process in terms of where the right locations are for marine aquaculture development. I'd like to share with you information about our Ocean Reports tool, and this is accessible over the internet. Anybody can run this application from their desktop. What we worked to do was leverage on approximately 10 years of data collection and data mining throughout the coastal ocean, and which encompasses over $10 million in data development. And then our goal was to build an application in which anyone could pull up the application and draw a box of any shape and size and receive a customized spatial analysis for that ocean space within just 1 or 2 seconds, and that they could do that analysis repeatedly as many times as they like for as many shapes as they like of all of the shapes and sizes. And we're very excited to report that we were successful in completing this web application. This application was rolled out about a year ago. You're able to access over 81 infographics in any ocean neighborhood that a box is drawn, encompassing 98 queries and about 160 vector and raster layers, and it all returns it in about a second. So what our goal was here was to bring automation to the geospatial sciences, and to be able to create a tool or an application that would allow anyone to basically analyze any ocean neighborhood to inform a myriad of questions from industry, conservation organizations, and such. So I'd like to walk you through the results of the tool, and then we'll do a bit of a live demonstration just for a couple of minutes. Well, the way that the tool is structured is that after you draw a box in the ocean neighborhood, on the left-hand side are a series of chapters that are returned. You have general information that gives you the reporting area, depth and elevation, populated places, proximity to congressional and legislative districts, federal statutes, etc., and tribal lands. The next one is oceanographic and biophysical data that is reported. Here we report multi-year climatologies of wave height, period and direction, current speed, current direction, sea surface height, temperature, nutrient information, and information such as harmful algal blooms that are known to occur in that area. And again, all this information is reported in by way of infographics. For energy and minerals, we have models that run that look at wind resource potential to show you where wind energy leases are. We have information such as renourishment and disposal sites. And as you can tell, as you run this application, your ocean IQ or ocean intelligence just increases, immediately by being able to see all this information that is summarized and reported in infographics for that ocean space. For natural resources and conservation, you see information about endangered species, habitat areas, artificial reefs, corals, and important whale or cetacean areas. We also have industry information. We report vessel routing information and traffic information. We report information related to our homeland defense. We have information related to other industries such as oil and gas and ports and those kind of things that are reported there in terms of infographics and statistics. And then lastly, we report information about the economy, the blue economy of that ocean space, such as ocean job contributions, GDP to the ocean economy, contributions by sector, fishing value, etc. So who will use this information? Well, ocean industries such as planners that are working to develop plans for, in this case, macroalgae cultivation. GIS and environmental consultants can use it to inform early scoping for environmental review or planning. Coastal managers can use it to understand the ocean neighborhood and how that neighborhood, what are the characteristics of that ocean neighborhood that will need to be evaluated as part of environmental review. Coastal planners can use it to understand opportunities and develop opportunity analysis, educators as well as the public. So I would like to just show you just real quickly how the tool works. So we're going to go to, we'll pull up the the Ocean Reports tool. Again, you can Google Ocean Reports, all one word. It'll be the first link that pops up. Click on Draw a Custom Area. You can then zoom into various any ocean neighborhood that you would like to be able to explore further. So we're going to zoom into the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, and then you can draw a box. As I said, you can draw a box of any sort of shape and size. I'm just going to randomly draw a triangle, and there you have it. Within a second, you have a spatial analysis for that ocean space. Now the tool allows you to turn on data layers. So you get the infographics here that you can see, and then you can turn on data layers and interact with the map automatically. So here I'm turning on boundary data for state and federal waters. So you see here that the location that we drew is within federal waters. You can also turn on other information such as seafloor infrastructure, which is quite interesting for this particular neighborhood, because this is a neighborhood that has a lot of, in this case, oil and gas development, submarine cables, and those kind of things that are happening here in the coastal ocean. If we and I'll turn on some, for example, oil and gas platforms that exist here. This area is highly developed for oil and gas development. So,
James, I need to remind you of time. Sorry about that, but it's running out now. So if you can please wrap up.
Very good. Well, that is the end of the talk. I just wanted to show you the demonstration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions during the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was extremely exciting. Thank you for the presentation, James Morris. So now we will run to the panel discussion. The first panel discussion is called The Need for an Accurate Regulatory Framework for Licenses and Certifications. And we have two panelists. The first one is Eliza Harrison. She has been working with Ocean Rainforest and worked with seaweed harvesting, processing, and packaging and sales from the perspective of an intern and later on as an employee. She's also actively developed a techno-economic assessment for the feasibility of seaweed cultivation in Southern California on behalf of the Macrosystems Initiative, which is funded by the AquaVitae. As a Robertson Scholar at the University of North Carolina, Capitol Hill and Duke University, she co-founded a company focused on temperate water seaweed cultivation, which won international recognitions. So welcome, Eliza. Our other panelist is Yves Brouwers. He's the co-founder of North Sea Farmers. North Sea Farmers is the European sector organization with a community of more than 100 seaweed pioneers. Yves has a background in engineering and offshore wind, and therefore tries to support all community members that are active in seaweed production and processing. Welcome, both of you. And now we need this, yeah, good. Yves, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi. I would like to ask you the first question, and also remind all the participants that you can ask questions in our question and answer tool. Yves, why is the organic certification significant for the food market?
So you're asking me in general, or for the, let's say, the European situation?
Let's keep it to your own situation, the EU situation, and then we can ask Eliza afterwards what she thinks.
Well, yeah, I guess organic certification can be important. But if you, from our point of view, if you're looking a little bit more towards scaling up seaweed cultivation for, let's say, direct food applications, or maybe even food ingredients, yes, organic can help, but complying with let's say, regulatory standards, or even more retail standards in terms of food safety, like BRC, for instance, is probably as important. And maybe the organic certification comes more into question when you're considering your positioning of your seaweed farm or the product that you're producing in the marketplace.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Eliza, do you have anything to add to this challenge that many food producers ask for an organic certification of the seaweed? Or
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
is it in the US?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ord, for the introduction, as well as for being able to chair this panel this morning, or afternoon rather. I do think organic certification is a very interesting issue in the United States because it's something that our consumer base has become increasingly familiar with as a way to identify a product that is more environmentally sustainable and healthier, and therefore is arguably better to purchase. And the challenge with how seaweed aquaculture or seaweed in general fits into that is there's no current standard issued by the USDA for securing organic certification for seaweed products. Everything is going to be done at a much more state or even local level to secure that certification. And that stems in part from the larger definition of organic certification, which requires that crops are grown in part in soil, which of course does not apply to the marine environment. But I think, especially as we move forward in developing this industry, there is a real opportunity to make people aware of the larger environmental and social benefits of seaweed in a way that it extends further than an organic label. That said, I do think there would be value, and I'm thrilled to see that the USDA is in the process of looking at organic certification opportunities for aquaculture.
Thank you. So I hear you say that that normally yeah, we need to grow seaweed in the soil to use these regulatory that exist. So how do we deal with this fact that seaweed is often compared to either fish farming or even agriculture like tomatoes and so on? How do we bring seaweed in the front as a whole group of organisms and not comparable to fish or tomatoes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think one that the industry, and I know we've been wrestling with in California for the last few years, also within the context of the permitting application process. Because one of the challenges that we've seen over the course of the last year in working under the Department of Energy's ARPA Mariner program is that there's not an understanding, or there's not a very kind of widespread understanding of what seaweed farming is and how it differs from finfish aquaculture, or even some types of agriculture. And so part of the effort, and I think how we begin to address that comparison, or be able to kind of mitigate that concern, is by going through kind of educational processes of making sure that people are aware of the larger opportunities of seaweed cultivation. And that stems both from beginning to build social license, which comes from engaging all regulatory stakeholders, much like we're doing now, but also people in the local community, so commercial fishermen, community council members, just so we can collectively begin to understand what seaweed farming is, and then in doing so, begin to shift that perception of how it might be similar to finfish aquaculture. But it also stems from educating regulatory agencies in their permit review process to make sure that we're actually able to move forward and create some of these seaweed farms that we propose. And the other component that I think is very important to acknowledge is the fact that as we're looking to create these demonstration projects, which is what we're working on primarily in the US, there's an opportunity, or we have an opportunity, to perform extensive monitoring and kind of quality control checks to make sure that the work that we're doing in seaweed cultivation doesn't have any sort of unexpected impact on the surrounding marine environment, and then instead being actually able to demonstrate kind of the more positive impacts. And so by adopting that more rigorous and environmental monitoring program, I think we have an opportunity to kind of get ahead of any sort of, or to avoid a lot of the negative impacts that were associated with agriculture, and therefore further be able to shift the perception of seaweed aquaculture as something being comparable to these other types of biomass and food production.
Thank you. Very interesting. And Eve, you could maybe continue where Eliza she stopped. And my question is then, should seaweed products instead fall under established sustainability labels such as ASC or MSC, or as one of our participants are asking in the chat, would it be better to aim for a label of sustainable rather than organic? What is your opinion on this? Thanks. Are you there?
Yeah, I can't seem to start my video. I'm not quite sure why, but yeah, I'm there. Well,
but we can hear you. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear. Well, I think it's a step in the process. Like I said, I think it's a bit more towards positioning. I think in Europe, what we're looking at is, hey, let's try to get the proper certifications and quality controls on the actual produce or the actual yield of seaweed that we're getting, because we need to be able to sell it to the markets. And yes, that may be a very visible product to directly to end consumers, but there are many more markets, like the feed market or the food ingredients market, and they just need you to comply with certain regulations, and for that you need it to be certified. And I think in Europe you have the efforts of the European Normalization Organization that's trying to set up standards on how to properly measure and classify seaweed Europe-wide. And then it's for the national governments to try to set, because they're just saying the methods, they're not setting the limits. That's for each member state to set those limits. And then it's a question to verify as a seaweed producer that you're able to comply with those limits. And maybe you do want to, and once you've done that for your particular market, whether it's food or feed, then you might want to think about positioning. Maybe you're doing something for pet food and organic is a plus. Maybe you're doing some particular food ingredients and yeah, there it doesn't really have an added value. So I think that's almost an individual consideration by each seaweed farmer, how he wants to do the positioning after he has secured the proper certification for actually being able to supply to his customers.
Thank you so much.
Hey, if you can put on your radio, then we can see you now.
Yeah, and please don't turn it off during the panel discussion, because then you will lose the opportunity to be in the video. So now we will shift a bit under this certification and regulatory panel discussion. And Eliza, how should the regulatory be to credit a seaweed farmer for increasing biodiversity and binding carbon dioxide through seaweed production?
Absolutely. This is a very exciting topic, I know, for many of us in the field. And it's something that actually an organization called Oceans 2050 is working very actively on to begin to explore. But I think there are two kind of main components or main avenues that we're going to need to explore as an industry as to how to realize the full value of seaweed cultivation, specifically in terms of carbon dioxide carbon sequestration, as well as kind of these larger ecosystem services. And the first stems from developing a carbon voluntary protocol that will allow us to basically verify that there is a certain amount of seaweed, or pardon me, carbon that is sequestered from seaweed that then can be translated into farm acreage or kind of whatever those metrics end up being as we kind of move through this larger exploration through Oceans 2050's work. And then the other component is the ecosystem services, which is something that is a bit newer, at least in the US context, and people are less familiar with as to how to begin to really monetize that. Because there's a challenge associated with how you actually demonstrate the ecosystem services of seaweed in such a way that would be able to then have a dollar value associated with it. So one potential way—
I can maybe clarify it a bit, because I assume that it will bring higher biodiversity.
Yes.
But in China, of course, where it's done really large scale in shallow waters, you see a destructive effect of the biodiversity. Why I'm telling it a bit different or framing it a bit different is because we see a lot of organisms or animals living around our seaweed cultivation lines, and we do not today have a tool to monitor this. So please continue, because it's of course part of it, how to monitor, is it good or bad for the biodiversity?
Yes, and I think that's an excellent point, and a lot of this comes in scale, both in terms of at an individual farming level as well as kind of the industry as a whole. But I think there could be, well, there definitely are existing studies that are going on that are trying to evaluate kind of the larger ecological benefits associated with seaweed cultivation. And I think as those studies continue to build and demonstrate what we presume is going to be a pretty positive impact, depending on your cultivation strategy, then there will be the individuals and the farmers will have a better opportunity to go back to the regulatory agencies and begin to incorporate or determine how to incorporate those ecosystem services into their potential carbon credit programs. But I think for now, it would be mostly a question of simply recognizing that depending on the method of cultivation, if you're doing it in a sustainable way, if you've done your homework in terms of the environmental impact assessments that would be required for many regulatory agencies, then potentially just increasing the price associated with those credits could be one way to begin to address this.
Yeah. And if is this credit for seaweed farmers for increasing biodiversity or binding carbon dioxide, is it something that you are looking at in the North Sea Farmers organization? Is it not something that you consider at the moment?
Sure, of course. One of the let's say key attention points. Let's almost part of the mission to try to support a sustainable European seaweed sector. But how do you make it sustainable? That's of course the main question. And we all know the stories about that. It probably will increase biodiversity. But I think we also have to be honest, and we don't know for sure, or we can't quantify it properly. And that will also, there are potential positive impacts, and let's try to nurture and grow them, but we have to be realistic. There could also be potential negative impacts. So I think the way we would like to approach it here is a kind of a trick that was also applied, at least in the Netherlands when rolling out offshore wind, is to set up a kind of a framework environmental impact regulation. Maybe I should say it in this way, where you come to an agreement with the government, like, hey, we think it's probably going to be positive, but we don't know yet. Give us the time and the liberty to scale it up to a certain level, and parallel to that, we're going to monitor, try to get a better handle on what's happening on biodiversity, and an aspect that's of particular concern here also, what will happen to the nutrient availability. So those are two factors that you could address and try to get a feeling for in such a framework, and I'm thinking about more like 10 years or so to get a better handle on it. And mind you, measuring biodiversity is extremely difficult. They're trying it very hard in offshore wind farms, and it's not easy, and it's difficult to get to final conclusions. So I would try to come to a framework environmental impact regulation with your government in trying to scale this up and be open about the fact that you don't know everything yet. And you have to be honest about that. Otherwise, you're creating expectations you cannot meet. And maybe one word on the CO2 sequestration.
Yes.
And this is more an opinion than maybe even also a personal opinion. But I think it's good. I think one of the North Sea Farmers goals is also positive impacts, positive climate impact with seaweed cultivation. But we would think that climate impact would rather come from offsetting fossil-based supply chains rather than really sequestering large amounts of CO2 in the ocean by means of seaweed cultivation. And I think anybody who wants to go that route, it's good to also quantify what you want to certify before you go in that direction. But that's more, like I said, a side point.
No, I think it's really relevant. Thank you both of you for those answers. We will jump to the next question, which is, we can start with you, Eliza. Where do you see the main bottleneck for fast upscaling of seaweed farming offshore in the US? And afterwards, I will ask you, Eve, about Europe. And the main opportunity. So the bottleneck and the opportunity for fast upscaling of offshore seaweed farming.
Absolutely. I think this is a really important question, especially as we look at our work in the US in the context of our work with the Department of Energy, because one of the primary bottlenecks to our work so far has been developing an efficient regulatory process, or even navigating process of securing a permit to be able to execute what we're referring to as a small-scale demonstration project, which is not a commercial operation at this point and is solely intended to really evaluate the structure that we've proposed under the RP Mariner program. And that process is not very well defined in California by any means. I know this is different depending on which state you're working in, but in California, we've kind of had to cobble together all sorts of different resources. The NOAA team that James is kind of in charge of has been super critical in terms of our ability to move forward in this piece, but there's still no established framework of how we actually move forward and how we approach the regulatory agencies. And so I think that's one of the critical bottlenecks that are specific to the US. And then more generally, of course, you're looking at improved harvesting technologies as well as more efficient processing strategies that will also be helpful as the industry continues to develop. But going back to the permitting, I think there's also a real opportunity, and one of the most significant opportunities, at least as we work in the US, is to go about the permitting process and then ultimately the deployment and monitoring and harvesting from seaweed cultivation structures in a way that is very transparent and is accessible for others in the community to understand. Because by doing that, not only do we have the opportunity to build social license at a broader scale, but we also have the opportunity to demonstrate to regulatory agencies the impacts or non-impacts associated with seaweed farming. And that's something that wasn't true in many ways for the agricultural industry. So by adopting that and by being very proactive in terms of making sure that we collect all the data that we can about the larger kind of environmental, social, and economic benefits of seaweed cultivation, I think will be really helpful in encouraging the development of the industry in the years to come.
Yeah. If we go to the Europe, do you see any main bottleneck or any main opportunity for the seaweed farming offshore in Europe?
Well, at least I hope I at least see both. Otherwise, it would be very dim response. No, in terms of bottlenecks, of course there are plenty smaller bottlenecks. But the way we look at it, if you look towards large-scale seaweed cultivation, be it nearshore or offshore, the key factor here is predictability. Predictability of yield, so considerable volumes, and also the quality of your products. If you're not able to promise a certain volume year on year, then it's very difficult for the market to take you seriously and to start investing on the supply chain that you want to set up. So predictability is key. And there's also in light of that, there is also a point of attention towards I would say diversity of seaweed species that you are able or allowed to cultivate. That's a whole other topic, but that's also something to consider. At the moment, I think there are very few species that are easily cultivatable throughout Europe, and it would help the sector if that would increase. So that is in terms of the bottlenecks. The opportunities are luckily plentiful. And I think maybe the most important one is that you just see the market demand increasing for seaweed, whether it's in food, feed, or in biostimulants, if you want to call it. So there's a very good growth numbers that we're seeing here, and sometimes even double digit, which is good. But now it's a question of seizing that opportunity by giving them the supply that they need to shift to European seaweed. And I think it really helps that Europe is trying to focus on developing the blue economy, as they call it, basically using the marine resource as part of their economy. I think it helps that you're having a lot of wind farm developments. So you're excluding that part of the ocean for other uses, ship traffic, maybe even fishing. but you're taking up a lot of area. You want to use it in a more efficient way. Well, seaweed, sorry, Siri. Seaweed could play a significant role there. And finally, I think what's also important is just the fact that we're trying to adhere to the climate accord. You just see all kinds of organizations looking for a solution in their existing business processes.
Yeah.
Whether it's chemicals or energy. And yeah, seaweed could play a really helpful role in that transition. So there's where the opportunities are.
Thank you so much. Thank you both, Eliza and Eve Brouwers. An applause to you. And we will now have our second poll. So please, all of you participants, we would like you to vote in this next poll, and you have 2 minutes for that. After that, we have a short break before the second session. We will start again, let me see, 20 minutes past 2, is it? Yeah, 20 minutes past 2. So thank you all for the first session.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi again, all of you. We have a half minute left of the break. So please come back to the screen and we will start in 30 seconds. Okay, welcome back from the break. Our next session is about logistics, and we have two presenters in this session, and afterwards a panel discussion again. So I hope you are looking forward to this. I am. Our next speaker is Flora Marsman. She is the production manager of Ocean Rainforest since 2019. She is responsible for our operative matters, including permits, certifications, food safety, quality control, and traceability. Flora holds a master's degree in biology from Rhodes University. So please, Flora, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Urt. So after the selection of the right sites for macroalgal cultivation, the next step is to deploy new farms. So another task in the AquaVitae project is to test and demonstrate large-scale reuse of marine equipment in algal cultivation as a circular approach. The use of second-hand equipment from other marine industries has been suggested as a method to sustainably reduce the installation costs of seaweed farms. Instead of the constant production of new goods, we are investigating how products can be reused so they can stay in use for a longer time. And in this way, we can both reduce the investment in capital, which is prohibitive for a pioneering industry, and at the same time, reduce the amount of waste and pollution. So understanding the opportunities and methods for the use of secondhand material is a fundamental part of building a circular economy that adds value to waste. So in case of the Faroe Islands, the salmon farming industry is very large and is growing bigger every year. So the upscaling of the salmon farming is a great opportunity for smaller scale ocean operators like Ocean Rainforest to reuse fish farm equipment that has become too small. You already saw this picture of the Ocean Rainforest cultivation rig in Johannes' slides, but I'll briefly guide you to the design. So the design consists of a horizontal line submerged 1 meter below the sea surface. The mooring system consists of anchor buoys and anchor lines with anchors which are anchored in the seafloor. And at the horizontal line, the vertical lines are hanging down with a sinker in the end. Those are the lines where the seaweed grows on. And the horizontal line is kept 1 meter below the sea surface and held in place by numerous floats. So in the fall of 2019 and the fall of 2020, Ocean Rainforest has deployed 2 new rigs, from which you can see some pictures on this slide as well. And both rigs consisted partly of second-hand material. So basically, the rig relies on ropes, buoys, and anchors, and thereby offering a very a simple and flexible structure that moves with the ocean instead of resisting it. This graph shows all components of the rig and their share to the costs of the rig. And the anchors and buoys, floats, and seed materials are the main contributors to this cost. So what we have done is we made a suitability assessment per element, whether it is suitable for reuse or not. And we made a cost evaluation of this reuse. So anchors, chains, and buoys are found to be most workable for reuse in macroalgae cultivation, because they often have a longer lifetime than they are used in other marine industries. For example, when they have become too small, or when quality cannot be guaranteed for the purposes from other industries, but they can for ours. Ropes, on the other hand, are less suitable for reuse because of two reasons. They need to be clean, and the cleaning or proper cleaning and rinsing is very laborious, and therefore not scalable or economically feasible. And also the strength of the line need to be assured, need to be we have to have a required strength for equipment used in the ocean because of safety and insurance matters. So in order to get ropes, we need to have strength test. For the cost evaluation, we made a comparison between two scenarios. One scenario with all new material and a scenario with optimal use of secondhand material. So the optimal reuse scenario is 100% reuse of anchors, chains, mooring plates, buoys, and floats. For the steel elements, we calculated their costs by the weight multiplied by the price of scrap steel. And for the second-hand buoys and floats, we calculated them with a 50% discount on the new price. This resulted in the following graph. Here you can see both scenarios, the full price scenario and the reuse discount, and the price is on the y-axis. And you can see that with 100% reuse, there is a reduction of costs by 41%, or up to 41%. So as I said before, it's using secondhand material is not only favorable to reduce the costs of new rigs, but it also reduces the production of new materials and thereby reduces the burden on the environment. So this graph shows the CO2 equivalent of all the materials in the rig. So one way to quantify the impact on the environment is to calculate the CO2 equivalent per element. And we did it by multiplying their weight by the emission factor for that material. And we categorized them, all the elements in our rigs, categorized them in three categories: nylon, EVA, and steel. And all the steel elements and buoys and floats, if we reuse them, that would make a reduction of CO2 equivalent up to 46%. So, as a conclusion, the use of secondhand material can have a large contribution to both costs and environmental impact reduction. And anchors, buoys, and floats have been found to be most suitable for second-hand use. But of course, there's also a however. Unfortunately, there is never an optimal scenario. So the numbers that I showed in this presentation are likely to be much lower in real life. Also, this cannot be used as a standard manual. This is how we experienced it in the Faroe Islands, but it's most likely this will differ per country, and therefore it needs to be assessed per individual case whether reuse is suitable or not, and in what way. And lastly, of course, there is a decreased opportunity for reuse with the scaling up of the seaweed industry. I want to finish the presentation with a picture I took on the boat yesterday. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Flo. Thank you for the very nice presentation. And the next presenter is Ólafur Gregersen. He is the co-founder and managing director of Ocean Rainforest, with responsibility for the overall management and business development of Ocean Rainforest. He has more than 20 years of experience as entrepreneur and international consultant, as well as being non-executive director of several innovative companies and projects. Ólafur has specialized in business development, project management, and socio-economic impact analysis. And he has been the coordinator of several European and Nordic research projects. So please, Ólafur, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon and good morning to everybody. In this talk, we will focus on the improved logistics in offshore cultivation. Improved in the sense that what have we improved, or what do we think we can improve based on the work we have done in this project, AquaVitae, and other projects over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years. But I would like to start this talk with setting the scene from a talk and using a graph from Carlos Duarte that he presented last week. And this is just to highlight, obviously many of us will know this graph. We look at that the global production of seaweed today is around 30 million ton wet weight, but his projection is that if we look at the annual growth today of 6.2%, we will reach 229 million tons of seaweed in 2050. And his point is that we obviously need to focus on how to scale up in order to accommodate this. And when we talk about logistics in this session, it's definitely in that context. How can we scale up when we are really talking about increasing the annual amount of seaweed production considerably? So in order to do that, I tried to identify some hotspots in the supply chain. So here we have a very simplified supply chain. The green areas are the ones that are directly related to farming, hatchery, cultivation, harvest, and then we have the onshore processing of the supply chain. The hatchery process usually contains some kind of strain selection, propagation, hatching, and then seeding. And then in the cultivation part, as we heard from Flo, there is a process related to deploying anchors and mooring lines in order to complete a rig system of some kind. Then you are ready to seed your lines, and you will monitor and make sure that they survive. The seaweed will grow, and then you can harvest, and the harvest will then contain a number of processes, usually sailing out there, harvest, perhaps do some pre-processing on board, sailing back and landing. So the hotspots that I think are in this lane, this is based on the experience we have from over some years, is definitely on the seeding part. How can you seed efficiently? How can you harvest efficiently? and how can you make sure, if you have large biomass, to get that into process as fast as possible, bearing in mind that seaweed usually degrades within 24 hours. There are some other minor hotspots, perhaps in the hatchery process, that has to be scalable, or the more scalable it is, the easier it is to do large scale. The rig system in itself can also be a hotspot in terms of logistics, and the way you seed and use the rig system. But if we go to the first of these identified hotspots, the seeding part, you can look at, do you use string seeding as many use today, or do you use direct seeding? And you can see we have some pictures here of both of them, where you have the string seeding in the hatchery and how it looks like after when it starts to grow, actually around here in February in the Faroe Islands, and the direct seeding where we grow the gametophytes in the hatchery, and then seed them when we can see sporophytes and they're ready to seed. The latter part is definitely very scalable. I think this fall we produced 350,000 liters in a 20-foot container of seed material. We didn't use all that, obviously, but that just gives you an impression of how scalable that is. But the next part in seeding is then the quality and speed in which you can seed. In the macrosystems project that we are working on in California with funding from Marifeed Mariner project, we are also testing how we can do seeding more precise and also optimize density. Another aspect that I know that, for instance, Hortimari and other companies in Europe are looking at is how can we optimize the substrate itself so that it can obtain or maintain the seeded glue, the seeded material better. We know today that there's a lot of material lost in the first week after it is deployed. That has something with the glue ability is the word I use. And finally, the meter per hour. We are only able to seed around 5,000 meters in a 5-6 hour working day. But I know there are machines that today can seed up to 15,000 meters today, about 50,000 meters within 8 hours. And we probably have to increase that. Another part of seeding is timing, when to seed in terms of in the fall. And also we know that direct seeding grow slower than string seeding. So your harvest window, how long is that? Is that 1 month or are there several months you can harvest it? All this has impact on the seeding part, and then the cultivation part can also be when we're talking offshore. This is a picture outside south of the Faroe Islands. You can see the islands, very nice on a good day. And when we talk offshore cultivation, we tend to differentiate in these parameters, water depth and distance to shore. We already seen a bit about that, but we differentiate in offshore, nearshore exposed, and nearshore sheltered. And Urt and Javier and myself, we had a publication on these aspects earlier or later last fall. Below or over 50 meters and closer or further away than 3 nautical miles from the shore. This is how it looks like on the water, and also on a very good day. This is underwater, and this is how it looks like when the weather is not so nice in the Faroe Islands on a nearshore exposed site or newest site. And in that ocean, there are 40,000 seeded lines. And this was at the end of January, and they are still there, even though we had some storms instead. But so just to say that the cultivation system itself is important, both when we talk about how we seed and not at least how we harvest. There, I would also like to say that, or I think that one of the first differences is the seaweed you're growing. Does it float or does it sink? Like macrocystis in California, it has buoyancy, and compared to Saccharina that we grow here in the Faroe Islands, when we harvest it, it sinks. So that has an influence on how you can actually harvest, what kind of method you can use. And then there is the grow line system itself. Normally we talk about either a horizontal system or a vertical system. The horizontal system is quite often continuous. That has an impact on how easily or efficiently you can harvest, while the vertical system often, not always, are batch-based. And that has also an impact on how efficiently you can do the harvest. And then, of course, your harvest strategy. Do you do multiple or a single harvest on each seeding you do? Or and do you have a manual or mechanical process for that? So here we have a horizontal line, or an example of a horizontal line. Here we have a multiple harvest where you leave the spiral stem to regrowth. Also definitely manual, as you can see on the knife on that picture. And here are very mechanical. I think this one, as I recall from Javier, could harvest around 300 ton per day. So this has impact as well. And then logistics, if we look at costs, we have done some calculations on that and compared. If we use the status of last year, the summer the summer of 99, compared with what we would like to do. And obviously there's a big difference both in terms of cost and how much biomass you can operate with. One, when we talk large scale, I think it's also worth noting that a biorefinery requires 10 tons of wet weight per hour. And that obviously has an impact on how do you organize your harvest in terms of scale and how much you bring to shore per day. These numbers with how we did, if we harvested for 21 hours in 2019, we could get like 15 ton of wet seaweed to shore. If our wet dream comes through of our underwater harvest, that we can bring in 300 ton in the same period of time. And there's an enormous innovation that's required in order to do that. It will also mean an 86% reduction in cost. And look at also how many vessels are required to do this. In the 2019 scenario, it's around 16 and 1 in 2000 in a future scenario. So Ord is quite keen on getting me to stop, and that's always difficult to say, but I need another minute. Transport and landing. TAPS is what we use today. It's definitely not the future. This is a picture from Iceland, where they harvest 100 ton per day and put it on nets and bring it to shore. And I know also in Norway they do processing on the harvesting vessels, also an option to do. And then also when we talk logistics, we have to look into the life cycle assessment context. To what extent do we put carbon into what we cultivate? And to what extent can we use the seaweed to avoid emissions and reduce emissions when we use the seaweed? All this has also impact on, my conclusion is that the logistical challenges of a seaweed cultivation system are interdependent, in my opinion. There's not a one solution fits all. The main determinants are environment, species, that the environment you grow it in, the species you're growing, the cultivation system, the location, and the carbon impact. And that defines the choice of seeding method, harvesting system, and landing and processing scale. And with those words, I would like to say thank you. And our vision is to have a local ocean rainforest around the world. Thank you, Ord.
Thank you, Olavur. And from these two presentations, we will now continue with the second panel discussion, which is called The Need to Upscale and the Development of New Technologies to Reduce Operation Costs and Take Advantage of Economics of Scale. And for this panel discussion, we have two new panelists. The first one is Brand Smith, who is the co-executive director of Green Wave, which is a nonprofit dedicated to training and supporting the new generation of ocean farmers. He is a long-life commercial fisherman and a pioneer of regenerating ocean farming. Bran is the winner of the Buckminster Fuller Prize, and he was named one of the Rolling Stones magazine's 25 people shaping the future. Also, he was featured in the Time magazines as best inventions of 2017 and is the James Byrd Award winner, author of Eat Like a Fish, My Adventures Farming the Ocean to Fight Climate Change. So welcome, Bran. I will also introduce our other panelist. Javier Infante is an aquaculture engineer working with Ocean Rainforest. His main expertise is in seaweed cultivation. He has many years of background cultivating macrocystis. He has expertise in organizing, participating, and managing marine and environmental projects. And Javier has taken the lead as the PI on the AquaVitae project, Macrosystems in California. So welcome, Javier, as well.
Thank you.
Now I need to see, Brand Smith, are you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you. Thank you so much.
Great. Hey, real honor to be here. Oliver has been a mentor of mine, and I'm looking at the attendee list, and like, there's just so many people that have taught me so much. So,
and I'm sure that both of you are also mentors for a lot of people in the seaweed sector. So
don't assume too much.
I know that both of you have been around in the seaweed world. So let's start with Javier. Which part of the seaweed cultivation process is in most need of technological advancement?
Oh, okay. I think we need to work in many different areas. Basically, I mean, I would think that the central challenge for upscaling and going offshore, would be first to validate the technologies that could enable cost-effective systems that could perform in offshore environments. I think this is really key to the development and the success of the industry. If we want to go big, we need to make it right from the beginning. There is not much room for mistakes. I could say an example of what's happening with us in United States. There's a lot of concern of mammal entanglement in seaweed aquaculture structures, and basically you can't afford for your infrastructure to be broken or loose or somehow not well designed in a way that could potentially trap a mammal. So that's what I mean when I say that we need the infrastructure to be very efficiently designed in a way that can survive the ocean, the open ocean environment.
Yeah.
That would be my first take, but there are also many others as developing automated or more mechanized components of each part of the cultivation or the seaweed value chain. You
see all of them as equally important, like.
Well, I mean, there is work needed in most of those areas. We have not yet achieved anything like large scale. I mean, at most, the biggest project that I'm aware of are 20 hectares or a little more, and they were near shore. So the experience in this area, it's really low. It's much more about what we think it would look like and what we would like it to be than what we actually know about it.
Do you agree on that, Bren, that we are not near a large scale at all?
I think I've got a view of scale of like, do we want to, is this going to be 1,000 acre farm or 110 acre farms? And I know everybody thinks like, you got to do efficiency of scale, but I actually think building a knowledge network because of the complexity of the ocean is really important, right? So I'd rather have 100 farmers trading information about what's happening in the ocean, where the nutrients are, new farm design, especially because we have to do 3,000 years of innovation that happened with agriculture in about 10 years before the planet ends, right? And so I think the question is, yes, we need to get to offshore, but what's the pathway to that? And I think it's I got here through hundreds of mistakes, right? And I think people need to make, I need 10,000 people making hundreds of mistakes, right, to get there. So that's the pathway. The other thing is, I think there are assumptions on offshore that, you know, across my desk, I get all the time new farm designs that I don't think, I just think it's folks that haven't farmed. Like the ocean, we will not win, right? So I see floating platforms. I see things that are extremely capital intensive. My view of the farming is that low overhead is our biggest competitive advantage. Your farm will be destroyed. The question is, how fast can you rebuild it and how cheaply you can rebuild it? The other thing is you need to be a willow, not an oak, right? Again, this is just because I was terrible at this to start, but like I used to try to fight the storm, stay above. I lowered my buoyancy, so I sink, right? Like a willow, and then pop back up, right? So just like the ocean is our business model and is our design partner, and she is brutal. So like my business model is built to be destroyed and still be successful. That's sort of.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this brilliant input. And I will continue in the same track. Seaweed is a low value biomass, and the scale is very important for the industry to ensure profitability. So Brian, how do you see that we can catalyze or speed up this upscaling process?
So I think there are two things. I really screwed this up. I started and was like, kelp is the new kale, right? Because that was like the hot thing in Brooklyn, right? And it's not at all, right? And kale, just so folks know, was like a rabbit food, celebrity chef thing, then went into Whole Foods and became center of the plate. Kelp is a very specific crop, and it looks more like soy, right? And the soy industry got together in 1950s, a bunch of guys with cigars and suits, and said, okay, we're never going to get Americans to eat soy. What are we going to do? Let's put it in everything. Let's weave it through every single industry. And we hear on this call all about all these interesting uses of kelp. Like we need to hide the kelp, right? Not only because taste is slow, right? Moving flavor, and food will be part of this for sure, but also biofouling. Like some of our farms, 80% will be biofouled at the end of the season, which isn't food grade, right? So that's straight an agricultural product, straight a feed product, straight a bioplastics product. So we need that, what we call is a whole leaf strategy. So food with packaging, like food, ingredients, mainly fertilizer, feed, and then bioplastics is our model. That's where my kelp went the other day. And then just the last thing I'd say is, I think we need to not just obsess about growing crops, like we need to grow food and byproducts, but we also need our farmers to be viable, to keep growing, to be climate resilient, to harvest data and be paid for that data. These are data platforms all over the country. And then the ecosystem services are key, but that might not look like carbon. It might look like taking kelp, putting it in the soil to fix nitrous oxide, right? Which is 300 times more powerful than a greenhouse gas. It might look like herring restoration. There was a farm in Alaska, some good, amazing folks. The whole thing was set with herring. Well, there should be a herring restoration fund that pays a farmer when that happens. If it doesn't happen, then they go the commercial route. But that whole frame of ecosystem service, and I am a bit worried that it's being trapped in the blue carbon framework as opposed to a really creative bundle of downstream benefits we're seeing from seaweed farming.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Many people are talking about selective breeding as a really important tool to break through this upscaling. And Javier, if you should say something about selective breeding, apart from increasing the yield, what should then be the focus for a breeding program?
Well, selective breeding is such a broad topic and a fantastic tool by itself. It really has so much potential. Of course, yield is the number one we think about when we talk about selective breeding, because, I mean, we want more of what we have. So improving our capacity to produce more using the same infrastructure, same operations, and same capital investment would always be good for us. But it's not only that. I mean, selective breeding, it's basically getting a trait of interest and promoting its development throughout the population, so increasing the average of its representativeness in the population. So depending of what your end product would be or what your market you're aiming to, you might decide on whatever different traits of interest. So in that sense, I mean, there is no single silver bullet or application for breeding. It depends on what you're looking for. Of course, there are general applications that improve the overall well-being of your cultivation system, like it would be disease resistance or adaptability to environmental changes. Those are like broad things that, of course, are desirable to improve and promote. But as I said, you might be interested in the phycocolloid or the pigments market, so you could select for a strain that would have more fluorotanins in its composition. So basically, it's about the market you're aiming for, besides, of course, the gain in yield and adaptability and general livelihood or well-being of your culture.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Nice answer. And Javier, now we have a live question in the chat. It's from Laila in Brazil. She's saying she has the same impression like you. How can we produce seaweed in large scale with mechanization, which is fundamental at this point, and pay for all this production system? Even if we are working with a high value seaweed, how make this economic viable? What is your impression from Laila?
I don't see the question. Thank you. Hi, Leila, and thank you for the question. And how? So I think that, okay. This aim for upscaling, I think it's a little an overstatement. I mean, we depend on the viability of our products. We depend on the markets. There is a certain demand nowadays, and there is a huge potential demands for new products that have not yet been either proven or I don't know, proven to be effective, so that they have created a demand. I think based on that, I mean, market is the fundamental driver. As soon as the demand is created, we are going to be in a position to start thinking about upscaling and moving on towards offshore and so on. From the economic perspective, I would think that upscaling is always good because of the economies of scale. I mean, it's usually more expensive to go in a low volume operation than in a big volume operation, when you can share, I mean, the cost with more product, or divide your cost in more quantities of your product. And also, when you start mechanizing, the initial investment would be higher, but in the long term, it should decrease the operational cost. So.
Yeah, thank you. Brand, we changed a little bit the subject now, but should stakeholders that are competing for ocean areas be involved in seaweed farming in a way that they, for example, are encouraged to grow seaweed in the same area as they have other interests in the marine area?
I mean, I think where we're going is hopefully sort of a reimagining of the marine park, right, for climate resiliency, right? Right now, the conservations, they want to set aside the ocean, which I totally understand, but if they do that, it's going to die, right? We need mechanisms breathing life back into the ocean, and luckily that's farming, right? And we can put people to work at it. So the blue carbon zones or climate zones in the ocean, imagine 2,000 acres where you have part farmers just doing reforestation, right? The Johnny Appleseeds out there. You've got a quarter where people are growing and harvesting their regenerative crops, and a quarter which is like an ecotourism space, and a quarter which is an artisanal commercial fisheries. And you replicate those 2,000 acre zones up and down our coast. Like that's the marine park that will stay alive, hopefully, in the era of climate change. So really updating that, and it allows us to zone all at once, right? Just to take this, but it's neither, but all these different stakeholders, it brings together different stakeholder interests. I just want to say one other thing about permitting real quick. Like I feel bad for the permitters because they get so many crappy farm designs that all look different of people just like, oh, let's do this, right? And actually, I mean, one of the things that Greenwave does is really work with the farmers that we work with to normalize, like same farm, same permitting language, and we know the yields, the budget, stuff like that. And I just put in the chat, we're coming out with a tool next month that allows farmers to put in ocean conditions, their location, their lease, and they will get a budget of 2 different farm designs, right, of different kinds of arrays, a budget and a gear list and permitting language, all to normalize this, which really allows for more social license and make sure the permitters don't get in trouble. Like I love the permitters. They permitted 219 seaweed farms in the US, right? That's amazing, right? In such, I don't see many fish farms at all. So the social license is really going there, but we need to push this in the right direction.
Okay, thank you so much. We do 2 short, very quick questions in the end, and that is for you again, Brian. Is Europe and the US, are they ready for the seaweed farming industry? And is there a main benefit for the citizens?
I mean, so I think we're seeing this in all sorts of climate solutions where they call it in the investing world, the valley of death, right? We could think of it as the trench of death, where you have really great ideas that then are not fully investable. You can't show in a traditional business or investing model, a 15% return in 6 years, right? And that valley of death needs to be supported through government intervention, government support, philanthropic support. And that's where we're seeing so many people on this call are supported through this interesting mix of capital stack. So I think that's going to be key. I think we do have to remember, like, people are suffering. The levels of inequality, pain out there is stunning. Like, how much can someone worry about habitat restoration when they're struggling? So I just think the jobs, the economic opportunity, like putting people to work, addressing the climate change in like a World War II footing is the way to go. Like, let's do these jobs. I always say, like, you see a lot of songs about fishermen. Let's write and sing songs about seaweed farmers in the seaweed industry at some point. So that dignity. So I think that's what's really going to move the needle in this time of like just real economic suffering and pain, at least here in the US.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The last question I have is for you, Javier. So what is actually driving, who are the customers and stakeholders that are driving the development and demand for an upscaling of seaweed cultivation? Who is it that desire this upscaling?
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of a tricky question because the reality is one thing, and what we wish for is a different one. The reality is that like 55% of the seaweed that is produced nowadays goes for the hydrocolloid industry, and 45% goes for the direct food consumption. So there is 1% or less that goes for different applications. In that sense, the actual real drivers are clear. It's the hydrocolloid and the food industry. But at the same time, with population growth, with care of the environment, we are seeing multiple ideas or projects how to utilize the seaweed in different ways. And definitely there's a huge potential for upscaling and expanding the markets of seaweed if we are able to nail down these new markets. And for that, there is not a lack because we are doing it, but there is a need to keep on working on research and development to understand better the properties, the qualities, the sustainability, the benefits in general of not only the seaweed as a product, but the seaweed cultivation as as a whole, with all the environmental benefits that it brings, with carbon capture, nutrient by extraction, reduce acidification, I mean, methane reductions if used as feed for cows and so on. I mean, there are many things that could trigger this potential demand for upscaling. But the reality is that is work ongoing. The real drivers nowadays are the same: hydrocolloids and the food industry. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Javier. Thank both of you for being part of this panel discussion. We will now, you can still ask questions to Javier and Brian Smith in our question and answer tool here in Zoom. And we will now run the third poll in this webinar. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, I need to say that we will have the next session called Macroalgae in Animal Feed, and that will start 5 minutes past 3. So that will be in 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. Can we get the poll on the screen?
Yeah, or I'm working on that. Seems
Okay.
that it's a bit more challenging than I would like it to be. Just a minute. I think I know.
You can have a 2 minutes break. Those of you who need that.
So the poll is open. Please. 3 questions related to what has been discussed. So appreciate if you could give your opinion about this. It will be used in the work we will do following this workshop.
Okay, I am ready to start the next session. Is that okay, Oliver and Flor?
Yep, you're ready to go. I think we'll finish the poll in 10 seconds and then you go.
Good. So our next speaker is Dirk Wisch. He started his career in the food industry as quality controller and worked his way to quality manager, production manager, and to director. From 2000 to 2004, Dirk focused his career on enzyme technology, fermentation processes, and specialized ingredients. Dirk joined the Marifeed team, focusing on business in its total, where the team focus in support and product development. Marifeed is a partner in AquaVitae, and please, Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oud. Oliver, I can't start my video. If you can just allow me. Thank you.
Now you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Oud, Oliver, and thank you for the webinar. I must say, well done and well presented to everybody, and Flo for your presentation or asking us to join. And Oud, you've got a tremendous task keeping us all going in the time. Well done. So I'm presenting just on macroalgae in the abalone feed. And in this case study 2, 3, and 4, we work very closely with Prof. Cliff Jones at Rhodes University, Jason at Aqua in Spain, Daphne Taylor at Wild Coast Abalone, and then Oliver and his team in the Ocean Rainforest. Next slide, please. Just to give you some background of the AquaVitae project. In this AquaVitae projects, there are certain case studies, case study 1 to 11, further developed to 13, that has got all its own various tasks and projects and research industry partners that working together. Next slide, please. And in these areas, there's different work package areas for innovation and research. Next slide, please. These work packages move forward from data right down to ethics. And in these areas, we as Marifeed and Rhodes University need to find common ground to work with different industries. So where do we work together? Next slide, please. We work together with the industry as a research and industry partner, which is touching common grounds where you can see in the red areas for offshore macroalgae, land-based IMTAs, sea-based IMTAs, sea cucumbers, low trophic feeds, and then within all the work package areas where we report to a scientific committee and a project and marketing group that again then reports back to the European Union. Next slide, please. So we have defined 5 value chains that we work together with. That is the macroalgal production area, the IMTA integrated multi-trophic aquacultures, new ecodome species like sea urchins and sea cucumbers, existing shellfish species like the oysters and mussels, finfish and fresh water and marine. Next slide, please. Within the macroalgae, within abalone feed, if you can move on for us, Oliver. There are 3 areas of sources of macroalgae in this project that we focused on. We focused on land-based IMTA, Ulva and Gracilaria that we sourced in South Africa. Sea-based IMTA, Gracilaria, sourced in Saldanha, South Africa. And then offshore-based kelp, which is sourced from the Faroe Islands. To continue. Marifeed in itself do use a lot of macroalgae in its current diets, where in 1996 we introduced the ES26 that's got the sea-based kelp in the base of the formulation, and recently after 3 years development we've launched the JMAX 32 that includes Ulva and Gracilaria in those diets. Next slide, please. Taking that as a background, and this is where all the work has been done, presented to us earlier, where they worked on the different areas in the world to cultivate these macroalgae, and we need to make it work. And this is just an example of an existing process where we looked at mussel rafts, where on the left-hand side you can see that the mussel raft was there only developed for the mussel farming only, the rafts and the boats and the staff, and then that was harvested and went to the market. And the abalone feed, we've designed it with the fish meal, soya, and harvested kelp as a protein source. And then that was manufactured, extruded to feed to the abalone industry internationally. Where with the new process, we've looked at the mussel rafts on the right-hand side as a more efficient use of its existing structures, where we then cultivate IMTA algae, Gracilaria on the rafts, and or the ulva, and then that was harvested and then used as part of the diet going into the feed for abalone in the industry. Next slide, please. What was identified through these processes and the questions we had earlier in the presentations, can we combine all these things together, was the one question of high risk that was identified as biosecurity. We have seen in the past in the industry that biosecurity could be a problem where viruses could go through, and we do not want to contaminate the industry. Therefore, on the left-hand side, we had the current industry where we moved from just harvesting the kelp and then included in the process of extrusion, where it was high heat and controlled pressure atmosphere, where we are developing a pasteurization and sterilization process. A student at the University of Rhodes, Petronella, is busy with her PhD focusing on biosecurity processes to assure that what we introduce in the feed is then biosecure and safe to use for the industry. Next slide, please. And this is then where the development has moved on, that we have, and apologies, there's only 3 abalone farms on this slide, but it's actually 4. There's 4 abalone or 4 farms that we are introducing these diets and testing other concepts using the IMTA systems. The farms are Quinion in Hermanus, South Africa, HIK, Gansbaai in South Africa, Aqua in Canary Islands, Spain, and then as well Wild Coast abalone in the Wild Coast in South Africa. Next slide, please. With some preliminary results that we've tested last year, we could see that there is surely a benefit using macroalgae in diets, but the formulations we use is very important, and the inclusion rates. Therefore, in this trial, we've done just a first test to see what is going on. Unfortunately, the FCRs wasn't well controlled, but however, we could see the results of the trial that was done at the Aqua in Spain. Next slide, please. So where to from here? We will continue with the trials on a farm as it was introduced, and we are still going on with this, and we still need to get all the results and then present back to AquaVitae of final results. We need to evaluate and continue with our R&D innovation possibilities that's come from this and work together to finding more and more solutions for the industry. We need to move to bigger scale production and launch of new products for the industry. And Marifeed will continue to unlock more potential at the end user by developing new generations of feed. Next slide. We would like to thank you on behalf of Marifeed, Rhodes University, Aqua, Wild Coast Abalone, and Ocean Rainforest for working together and could be able to present today to you. Thank you, Ord.
Thank you so much, Dirk. This was an exciting presentation as well, and I'm very happy that you could attend this meeting.
Thank you.
Now we have our third and final panel discussion. It is titled Macroalgae as Feed for Terrestrial and Marine Livestock. And I would like to present our 2 panelists. And the first one is Jens Legaard. He is the director and co-founder of Fermentation Experts. He is a trained farmer and a skilled salesman. He has worked in the animal production for more than 30 years, and in the past 20 years, he has dealt with the fermentation of feed. So welcome, Jens. Also, Nicole Price is in our panel today. Nicole Price, she is a benthic marine ecologist working as a senior researcher for Bigelow. She holds a PhD in ecology, evolution, and marine biology. She has a great interest in the global change phenomenon, ocean acidification, and warming. Her work is focusing primarily on the ecophysiology of seaweeds and their current and future role in dissolved inorganic carbon cycling. She's an expert in analytic tools using statistical modeling. And I know, are you there, Nicole?
What we know so far about macroalgae is feed for terrestrial livestock. And I also serve as the director for our Center for Seafood Solutions at Bigelow Laboratory. And thank you so much, Erd and Flor and Oliver, for inviting me to speak today. So there are lots of current uses for seaweed as livestock feed. This is not a new idea. Livestock have grazed on beach cast seaweeds for millennia, and seaweeds have been foraged for use as feeds in coastal communities around the globe, with evidence of intentional feeding dating back to at least 100 BC in Greece. And seaweed feeds are made for many forms of livestock. I'll be focusing on cattle today, but happy to discuss these other livestock forms. And it's commonly used as an organic feed ingredient at low inclusion rates, but the reasons that people use seaweed as a feed are broad. I'll just go over two brief ones. One is, these are results from a paper back in 2016 that shows that the somatic cell count can be reduced by including kelp in the diet. You don't need to know really what somatic cell count means. It's an indicator of milk quality. And when it's below this level of 400, you've got higher quality milk and can sell it for a higher value. Another reason that people might use seaweed as livestock feed in beef production is that it can increase the marbling score and therefore the quality grade of how you can sell the beef. And then there's also evidence that it can increase longevity in the shelf life, so it can increase other quality products of beef as well. And as we might all be aware, it's no secret that beef and dairy production face sustainability challenges in terms of the amount of carbon released and fossil fuels consumed during production. One line of research that has been intriguing many and capturing media attention is whether or not seaweed as a livestock feed can be used to reduce the cow's carbon footprint. Now, I tend to focus on US policy and Maine's carbon neutrality goals, but as I understand it, the EU countries must also reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030, especially in the non-quota sector, which includes agriculture as compared to 1990. So we're curious whether or not seaweed can help get us there through this agricultural implementation. So methane is emitted mostly from the front end of the cow, not the back end, as people might assume. And the cow emits about 500 liters of methane a day, which is equivalent to a loss of energy that could be put towards beef and milk production of up to 10%. And that means that there are 3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that are generated every year in the form of methane. Although methane persists in the atmosphere for far less time than carbon dioxide, only about a decade, it is much more potent in terms of its greenhouse gas effect, and pound for pound, its global warming impact is 30, maybe getting upscaled to 32 times greater than that of carbon dioxide over a 100-year time period. So globally, methane emissions accounts for 16% of the human-generated greenhouse gas emissions. So a reduction in methane emissions from the cattle and beef and dairy industries represent something that's potentially meaningful to the global carbon cycle.
Yeah.
There's a couple of methods that people can use to reduce methane emissions, but what we are most interested about, and this recent paper came out about, was a couple of bioactive compounds in seaweeds that have been demonstrated to reduce methane in simulated cow systems. And that's been shown for 23 species now in lab tests, and for a handful of species with a huge suppression rate of methane in animals in these trials. And that is more effective than current commercially available feed supplements. We recently had a livestock feed workshop series exploring the research opportunities for seaweed as livestock feed, and I'll just leave this slide up. I know we need to move on to discussion, but there's lots of things to consider when trying to implement this. Thanks for the time, Erd.
Thank you, Nicole, for showing these slides. They are extremely interesting, and I'm pretty sure I don't need to ask you if macroalgae can be used as a feed ingredients for terrestrial livestock. But I would like to ask you, Jens Legaard, what do you think about macroalgae as a feed ingredient for terrestrial livestock?
First of all, I'll try to give you an impression on what we're doing, because I'm not growing seaweed. We are just buying it, and we buy a few hundred tons. I think there's a lot of possibilities in seaweed, but not as a feed ingredient. Sorry, and I will tell you all the barriers why I don't believe in feed ingredients, seaweed as a feed. First of all, if you compare it and say you have to replace grain or protein, you have a very, very low protein level in macroalgae. You have a lot of water. You have 80 to 90% water you have to get rid of. It's take more CO2 to take it out than you actually gain or binding in the seaweed. Then you have different sugar types and metabolites which are working against each other. So if you're getting more than 2%, it will not be able to give you else than problems, and you will get diarrhea. And actually also it's pseudotoxic. That means it's inhibit growth. That's what we see on poultry and pigs. Then you don't have a consistent protein level, and feed millers, if they don't go to consistency in the deliveries, I mean, they can't make an optimization every second week because you can't deliver the consistent feed. Then ash content is very high, 20%. That's sand. Who want to buy sand? So actually, I don't see that you can overcome these problems very easy, because if you compare it with wheat or soya, then on a very good day, then the value of 1 kilo brown algae is the value of 1.5 cent euro. So it's very, very low. I don't believe you're coming there. Otherwise, grains and proteins has really to get up. But I really believe in seaweed as a feed supplement, and that's how we are using it. And for some of the reasons Nicole also said, yes, we're using it for better health. We have proved that we can replace antibiotics, and we can replace a lot of zinc in the pig industry. We are also doing a lot of research for humans, and this year there will come figures out, but actually 5 grams of our combination of plant protein and seaweed, we can actually do the same as 1 kilo of vegetables. So when you forget to eat your vegetables, you can take 5 grams of our products, and we'll change your whole bacteria level in the gut. We have proved that we can reduce cholesterol and sugars on diabetes people, and so on and so on.
And if people are interested in this, where can they find those new results?
It's not published yet, but it's coming, and we know the results, so it's coming. That's for human, but you can go on our homepage on European Protein and see what we're actually doing for the feed industry.
Yeah.
Because there's 10,000 different strains of seaweed, and we are only taking the brown algae in, and we haven't looked too much to all the other ones. But we took the 8 ones which actually you are growing and which we can get in large scales, and we have been looking into them on cross and up and downs and whatsoever. And we find that brown algae is only able to eliminate gram-positive bacteria. We can't find anybody which are able to eliminate gram-negative. But if we take rapeseed and ferment them together, then we can take gram-negative with our plant-based protein.
Okay, so I will stop you here, Jens. Thank you both of you for these very broad and very interesting introductions. So we can now conclude that you are both can agree that we can use seaweed as additives in feed, but not as a feed in itself. You are nodding, Nicole, so I think you agree as well. So if we continue from here, Nicole, what is the barrier to implement seaweed as an additive in animal feed?
There are several. One is, although seaweeds are generally recognized as safe, I think a major output of the workshop was still some remaining concerns about heavy metal absorption by seaweeds and transference to the feed animal and then the eventual food product for humans. And also concerns about, focusing so much on inhibiting methane and needing to acknowledge that whatever you feed to the animal, it does no harm whatsoever in terms of productivity and yields, and if where possible can also enhance productivity and yields so that there's profitability along each step of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And maybe those gaps between production of seaweed and the costs that Jens referring to for feed supplements is one of the bigger barriers at this point that I see.
Yeah, thank you. So Jens, you were also talking about there are reasons to implement seaweed in the animal feed as additives. So what are the drivers for implementing? You already mentioned some of them, but what is the main driver?
Of course, the laws are moving and consumers are requesting we are using less antibiotics, we're using less zinc. So you have to find different ways of doing things. But we're waiting for the law to be implemented because farmers are doing nothing before they can see it on the bottom line and they are pressed on that. So yes, we have found the ways to improve results for farmers, but we have to compete with antibiotics and results on the bottom line. Otherwise, you can forget it.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Do you have anything to add to this, Nicole? What about the drivers for implementing?
No, I think, if there are other health benefits to be identified, a lot of the organic farmers who use kelp meal in the US, when you ask them why they use it, they state a lot of reasons that don't actually have a lot of data evidence to back up those reasons. So I think there should be an effort made to test some of those theories in terms of impacting laminitis, impacting mastitis, other diseases that animals face. And those are complicated tests to do, but they should be done so that they're evidence-based assertions.
Yeah. So Jens Legaard, what should be the market strategy for implementing seaweed in animal feed?
I'll say same as for humans. I mean, we have proved by developments with fermentation, you can do a lot of things with fermentation. Actually, what we have proved and what we found with some seaweed strains when we fermented is it's a very, very anti-inflammatory product. We have proved it. We didn't just take it from the internet and said we could, and we could prove it by the production. So actually, when we get free piglets more, nobody believes us when we say that. Nobody's believe us when we say the feed conversion goes down by the sows by 10%. And the milking is coming up because you are actually eliminating inflammatory problems by the sows. And that is actually what you can see on the films. Yes, we're able to do it, but nobody believes you. So you actually have to go out and prove it and pay the farmers, do it, and I'm paying if you don't see it. But as it is by methane, it is also by sows. It don't turn tomorrow. It takes 3-4 months to change a microbiome. So we are only seeing the results on long term. And if we can't prove it on the bottom line that they are getting more money out of, they'll stop. That's the same with methane. It's a very good idea, but how will you raise the cows on the grass? How will you actually get the farmer to buy it in Colombia because he don't care about methane? You can do it by the milking cows. So you have to find something else exactly by the cows that you can reduce mastitis or something else, so the farmer will buy it. And that's what we are working on and saying methane is just a side problem. Yeah, side effect what we're getting out of. You have to talk and think about what happens on the bottom line. Money talks.
Yeah, thank you so much for this answer. Very relevant. Nicole, there's actually a question for you in the live chat. Nicole, it's from Scott Lindell. Nicole, you mentioned in chat that seaweed must be certified organic to be used as animal feed. is it fair to say that that is not true for it to be used as an feed additive?
No, it does. So I'll be a little bit more clear. It needs to be certified organic if you want to feed it to organic certified dairy cows. And even as a feed additive, it must be certified organic, or you need to seek exemptions. And this is even to conduct animal trials at experimental farms if those farms intend on selling the market, selling milk to the organic market. Yep.
Yeah.
There's some other questions there's 2 chat boxes going on, so I'm trying to pay attention.
but
Actually,
I have a better, I don't know if it's better, but I have another question here. Jens Legaard, does seaweed as animal feed ingredient have more potential than as human food in Europe and in the US?
yes, and I can do a calculation for you, because if you're looking and say that all Americans should eat 5 grams to replace vegetables every day, a small part is seaweed, but very, very little. It's the same with sows, and if we do that comparison and said by pig industry, it will be 100,000 tons of seaweed I need per year to supply 100% of the pigs in the United States, but it will only be half of the amount to supply to 350 million Americans.
Okay.
So there's much more potential in feed than there is in humans, because you have all the laying hens and so on. And you could go the strategy and say, okay, I want to make omega-3 egg. So then you have to feed the hen and actually get the omega out of the eggs for humans. So there's a lot of potential, but not which can compare to the feed industry.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, do you have anything to add to this question about, is it better used for humans, the seaweed that is cultivated worldwide, or is it better used as a feed for animals?
I just love to echo a panelist earlier that said there's no silver bullet. and Bren's comment, use the whole leaf, because there are potential ways to extract what you need out of the seaweed for feed, for a purpose of reducing methane, but also extracting other parts out of the seaweed for pharma or nutra that has a lot higher value. And we need to get as much as we can from the product, and develop bioprocessing platforms, and develop several market pathways, I think. That being said, it's already demonstrated that the animals don't have a palatability issue like the US citizenry might have in terms of considering eating feed. So I do think eating seaweed. So I think there might be a lower bar to entry into the feed marketplace.
Yeah. Thank you. And you have another question now from Jamie, stating that exciting findings about application of rockweed in agriculture, Nicole. What are your thoughts on using a slow-growing species, one that cannot be farmed yet, in large commercial applications?
Yeah. I'm going to simultaneously answer this question with Scott Lindell's question about standards for organic seaweed. I would really like to see the seaweed as animal feed industry move towards aquaculture and away from wild harvest, because of that last slide I showed and the phenomenal amounts of seaweed that are going to be required to meet that demand if we want to get it implemented broadly. At the same time, the National Organic Standards Board in the US is reconsidering how they certify organic seaweeds for wild harvested seaweeds, and making those certifications a lot more stringent to acknowledge the potential environmental impact from broad scale harvest. So I would like to see us move towards faster growing and cultivatable species. And I want to answer Wouter, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, as comment in the chat box too, that yes, most of the information to date has been using Asparagopsis taxiformis or Asparagopsis armata, a red tropical species of seaweed, to demonstrate methane suppression in cows. That doesn't mean there's not a host of people working on other browns, greens, and reds that are more easily cultivatable. and maybe have different halogenated compounds other than bromoform or the fluorotannins that I mentioned that could also be responsible for methane suppression. So we have a lot of work to do to figure out the exact mode of action within the cow rumen, and then thinking about ways to either, as Javier mentioned, selectively breed or select seaweed species for producing some of those bioactives in a known fashion.
Yeah.
Thanks, sorry.
Very good. Jens, another one for you. I think this will be the last one. So does seaweed have added values that you don't find in the well-established terrestrial resources that you have? So why do you want or use a little bit of seaweed in your feed?
First of all, because we can find metabolites you can't find in plant protein. You can't even find drugs which can do the same. So actually, yes, you can find drugs, but it's giving a lot of problems. We can do the same as some of the drugs. You can take it every day and you will not get any problems, side effects, in your human being. So actually, there's a lot of effects in seaweeds which you can't find. And think about half all of metabolites is coming from the nature which you're using in medicine. And still there's some metabolites you haven't found yet. And we only know a small part of which is available.
Yeah, I agree so much. So thank you for this answer. I would like to thank both of you, Nicole and Jens, for being part of this panel discussion. I can see there's a lot of chat going on, and I hope you will stay here until.
Or before you finish off, I think Scott Lundell has some questions in the question and answer session regarding the organic certified seaweed, and I think those are very relevant questions. So I think they were addressed to Nicole partly. I don't know if Nicole, if you can read them. Could we just because I think we have some time, so just could address that as well before we wrap up.
Could you kindly read it up for us, Oliver? I cannot.
Yeah, it's for Nicole. You mentioned in the chat that seaweed must be certified organic to be used as animal feed. Is it fair to say that it's not true for it to be used as a feed additive?
Yeah, to be used as a feed additive towards organic dairy, it still has to be organic certified seaweed too, even at very small inclusion rates. And then the second question Scott asks is about standards for organic seaweeds. There are standards in the US for organic seaweeds. They have historically been rather loose, and they're getting re-evaluated by the National Organic Standards Board. And there was a panel of maybe 25 scientists that helped revise those standards, and they are passing through review at the National Organic Standards Board. What remains to be seen is how those suggestions are implemented. That is specifically for wild harvesting seaweed. At least I'm aware of in Maine, for aquacultured seaweed, there are certainly organic standards for aquacultured species. And there was a discussion earlier about the difficulties in generating nurseries for seaweed and needing to add nutrients at the nursery stage to help the spores and gametophytes and juvenile sporophytes grow. The solution that people have found in Maine to that problem is to use organic certified nutrient supplements. So several levels of organic certification required.
Thank you so much for clarifying this, Nicole. And if we have no further questions.
Add to that, sorry for bringing that, but I think, I mean, in Europe, we do also have standards for organic seaweed cultivation even. So, so the standards are there. There might be discussions about how relevant they are. And we have those discussions. But I think that if you have a seaweed farm, that it is possible to get that product certified. And in fact, in many both food producers and also special shops, it's a requirement that you have an organic seaweed stamp, EU stamp, in order to access the shop or to sell to that food producer. I'm not sure about feed, but so these standards are there. But as I think Brent also mentioned, and I could see terrestrial panel also mentioned earlier in his talk that there's definitely room for discussions about the merit in some of these standards. Anyway, that's another discussion. Perhaps something to AquaVitae to work further on, and that's to you, Urt.
Yeah, and we can use this for the coming project period or for the rest of the project to focus on the organic certification and yeah. So thank you both of you and Oliver for adding important comments. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, now we have our final poll. So please help us out here. Afterwards, I will update on the coming tasks for AquaVitae in our project. So please hang on. But Oliver, you can.
Yeah, I think just before we go, I'd like to share the poll results from the last poll. We didn't really have time for that, but the first question was about reuse of aquaculture equipment. It's possible for the worldwide seaweed industry, and almost half of the participants agree on that, and quite many also definitely agree. So that's pretty. That's definitely an option. And then the second statement was that the competition for ocean space among stakeholders will prevent a rapid scale up of offshore seaweed cultivation. And there's actually 37% agree and 37% disagree. So interesting. And the third question was large scale mechanical harvesting over 100 ton wet weight per day is a precursor for scale of offshore seaweed in cultivation. And there seems to be quite an agreement between about that statement. So this was the shared results of this, and then I'll try to find the last poll here, and we will launch it now. Here you are, please.
And I give you to a quarter. No, I give you 1 minute to finish this. Okay. Oliver, could you please add the first slide or the next slide?
Yeah, but before you get that slide, since
we need the results.
We are still on fairly good time. I think I would like to end it. There's 72% of the participants that have voted, so we can end the polling. Do that. And then we can share the results to see what do people think about this. Seaweed will, in the coming 10 years, be an important functional feed ingredient to improve animal health for environment. Well, there seems to be a lot of agreement about that. Actually, only 10% are in doubt, and no 1% disagree. So that was very encouraging. Seaweed adds additional qualities to marine feed for low trophic species that's not gained through feeding with land-based resources. Again, a lot of agreement about that. I guess there's a lot of seaweed enthusiasts in the session here now. And seaweed should be prioritized as a source for human food rather than functional feed. No, that's not necessarily the case. So Thank you very much for participating in this polls. We will use these results also in the report from this workshop. Thank you.
Good. So after this final session on macroalgae as feed, I will, on behalf of the team, thank all the presenters and panelists for the big effort. Your expertise and knowledge have added valuable input to our case study, and we will use it in the future. And I think it has brought the future Atlantic seaweed industry a step further. Also, we would like to thank all of you who have asked questions during the webinar and participated in the polls. Thank you so much for being in this webinar. It means a lot to us. I would like to say a few words about the future of this case study, offshore macroalgae cultivation. And you see the slide. So today it was the first out of 2 events which will be held in the project period. This event has taken the results we have so far and involved you to get a better understanding of the process we have been through. But this webinar has also indicated some holes that we need to fill out in the coming project loop. So the second loop. In the coming years of the project, we will investigate the feasibility of large-scale kelp cultivation in other parts of the Atlantic Ocean we now have for the Faroe Islands. Now we will determine suitable species for large-scale production and search for useful sites at other places around the Atlantic Ocean. Also, we will focus our work on upscaling and optimizing the existing production we have in the Faroe Islands, and continuously testing seaweed together with Marifeed and Cliff at Rhodes University as an additive in abalone feed. So approximately 1 year from now, we will have a similar event, and hopefully this will be a physical meeting. And we are looking forward to seeing all of you for that coming event. So next slide, please. Oh, I see. Let me see. Oh, it's good. But 1.5 years is a long time from now, and we as a sector want to move fast. So if you have additional issues or ideas for collaboration with partners of AquaVitae, the panelists or presenters, you are more than welcome to contact us. On behalf of Ocean Rainforest and the case study partners, I would like to wish you all a good evening or day, depending on where you are located. So thanks to all of you.